myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot see.
Hi, welcome along to NUFC Matters. This is the Eddie Howe press conference review for the game against Fulham this coming Sunday, 2:00 kickoff. And as always, I'll take you through the highlights of today's press conference. First up was Matthew Raisbeck from BBC Radio Newcastle. He was asked about the cup draw in the semi-finals, of course, against Southampton. He said it's going to be a tough game, 2 tough games, but he's still pleased to be in the competition. But he says it's on the horizon. It's given us a lot of positivity. But of course, the next game is Fulham. All eyes back on the Premier League. Reza then touched on the Joe Linton situation. He said he's going to reflect on the situation, analyse the situation, consult with the player before he makes a decision as to whether he is going to feature on Sunday. He was asked about the injury situation to Matt Targett and John Joe Shelby. He says they're both continuing their recovery. He says, as for the rest of the team, everything is pretty much okay. But a couple of the lone players that are out have picked up injuries. Matthew Raisbeck then pushed on Matty Longstaff. He said, well, obviously he's out on loan. He sustained a pretty serious injury. He said, well, he's had his operation now. Says it's difficult for any young player picking up an injury. And he says, obviously, it's come at a bad time in his potential career. His contract, of course, up at the end of the season, and the injury is going to take a little longer to heal, I think. But it basically said that the club will see their duty through and see him back to full fitness. Also, Matthew pushed him on the Isak Wilson combo. Obviously, you know, Wilson coming off, Isak coming on against Leicester. He was saying, is playing them together still an option? He says, of course, they can both be on the pitch together. He says, but I need to evaluate this kind of thing every game and make sure that it doesn't affect the balance of the overall team. But he praised them both and said they both did well against Leicester. He's also asked about Isak's recovery. He said, well, look, he responded very well physically to playing against Sheffield Wednesday and then, you know, having a game second half against Leicester. And he says he's trained well this week. He says, but he did insist that he still needs to be very careful with him because they need him for the long term. They don't want any long-term injuries to affect him again, obviously. Moved on to Fulham after that, basically just saying, look, they're in good form. Marco Silva's done a great job down there. He says their style of play is good. It's technically interesting, and he says it's going to be a really good test for his defence. Matthew Raisbeck also pointed to the Fulham win last season, which of course was his second win as Newcastle manager. And he said, look, that win last season was season defining. He says we needed a win quickly and we got it. He says, although he does feel that the sending off in that game changed the game in Newcastle's favour. Keith Downey was up next. First question, as most people tended to be today, to be honest, it was about Joe Linton, asking if it had shocked him. And he says, you know, and shocked the club. He said, yeah, look, it was a shock. It's a difficult situation. He says he does realise the seriousness of the situation, as in Joe Linton does. And Joe Linton is very remorseful. He did push this a couple of times as well, that, you know, the club understand the seriousness of the issue. Also, Keith pushed him as to whether he would be involved Sunday and what kind of punishment he might get. And he said, look, everything's going to be dealt with internally. He says Joe Linton is a very good professional and it surprised him what happened with him. And he said, we need to educate him and help him and not overreact to the situation. So you've got to be careful with these situations. I said this on last night's show. This is something which at the moment is going to go to court. So we don't know the ins and outs of it. We can't really comment on it 100%. And Eddie Howe is in exactly the same position. Keith asked him about Qual going to Hearts. Said, you know, was that something that the club wanted, club that wanted him to go to? And he said, it's a personal, in these situations, it's a personal choice. He says, we've allowed him to go out, to go and see different people, different clubs. And he said it was a personal choice, a gut feeling after meeting with the coaches up there. And that's why he's up there. Last from Keith was about the goalkeeping situation. 4 goalkeepers, of course, at the club. Would one of them be leaving in due course? And he said, I don't think one has to leave. We want everyone to feel valued at the club, of course. And if, somebody feels that they're not being valued at this moment in time, maybe they'll leave. But at the moment, he doesn't he doesn't really want to let anybody go. Andy Sixsmith asked if he would, Eddie Howe would be doing the Dan Burn dance if Newcastle got to the final. He said absolutely not, because Dan has set such a high standard. Andy Sixsmith then pushed on to Dan Burn, as a player, and was he getting the plaudits? He said, look, he's not got the plaudits in his career that his performances have deserved. His leadership is not really seen to the public. He says, but his teammates say that, and he basically said he's Newcastle through and through, which is an added bonus. And he also said that generations of fans have never been in a semi-final, and he pointed to the fact that the team go around and do the lap of honour, and he just said, what was it like looking in people's faces, the fact that Newcastle had qualified for a semi-final, and he went, look, it's a nice moment at the end of the game when we're doing well. He says it can be different on depending on the result, but of course it was nice. And he then pointed to Joe Willock's Instagram post about we're wanting to bring history back to Newcastle. So Andy said, how will it look? And he said, look, we're keen to achieve things at this club. He says, but the semi-finals parked at the minute. Where my thoughts are on Fulham and the Premier League fixtures that we'll have before that first leg. So simple as that. Andy then mentioned 638 minutes since Nick Pope conceded. And wanted them to speak a little bit about Pope, but he pushed on and as you would expect from Eddie Howe, he just said, look, it's Nick Pope plus the people in front of him. It's been a collective effort. And from his perspective, everybody deserves equal praise. But it's a hell of a record, isn't it, folks? 638 minutes without conceding a Premier League goal. Also, just talking about the confidence that you can get from the crowd. He just said, look, we've got to embrace Tuesday's result. Fulham will be doing the same after their result last night. He says we've got to engage our crowd and get them on side, from the off. So, very important. And as always, a little pointer to his respect and to the fans and knowing that, how important a role we play on a match day. Nisha from the BBC was up next, and she said, was Tuesday up there with one of your best moments? He said, yeah, of course. He says it's up there. He said there's been, certain, points which I could, put alongside that. He says, but he says we want to go that step further now. He says, and it's not about patting ourselves on the back and praising ourselves. It's about continuing and pushing on and being the best we can. Nisha also said, look, it's obvious on social media. There's a lot of chatter amongst fans about booking seats on trains and hotels for Wembley, etc. She said, how do you keep that noise away from the players? And he said, look, the players are used to schedules and demands, and he says they know that they've got to focus on the next game and stay in the moment. So sounds as if Eddie Howe has that in hand. Nisha also pointed to the fact that it's coming up to the half-point way of the season, halfway point, of the transfer window. That was what she was pointing at, and she just asked, are we looking at players? Are we actively bidding for anybody? He said no. At this moment in time, we're still, looking at the market, but we're not close to bidding for anybody. She went, is it likely to be late in the window? And he said, if anything happens, yes. So, playing the transfer window right down. Simon O'Rourke from ITV was up next, just, again, just pushing about the crowd and, saying that they're in good spirits and, how important is it to get them on side. And the question had already been answered earlier on, really. He said, look, the supporters will be in good spirits and the Premier League's been good for us this season, but we need to engage with the fans, from the off against Fulham. Next up was David. Not sure who it was. David, I think it was, yeah, David. Joe Linton, he was asked about again, and he just said, look, professionalism is the key. We need players to understand their roles, on and off the pitch, and pointing, I guess, to a little bit of education maybe for Joe Linton, when we know what the situation is with that. Hastily moving on from that, David then moved on to Meetro, just talking a little bit about, the supply line that Meetro has. Is it important to stop that? Eddie Howe said it was a good point. He just said, look, Meetro's had an outstanding season. He'll be he will be playing, no doubt about that, on Sunday, and we need to just counteract the gift that he has. So simple answer to a simple question. Jordan Cronin was next, asking about Maxi, just asking if he was fitting well now. Obviously he'd had a bit of a bug and missed the Sheffield Wednesday game. He said, look, Maxi's fine, and he did well when he came on. And again, Jordan asking him about transfers, didn't get any didn't get anything from Eddie again. He just said, look, the biggest thing in January is, it's not the best available ability in this window. Prices can be higher. And as he keeps emphasizing, it's got to be the right player. So, not even sure we'll even get anybody in this window, to be perfectly honest. Ian Murder from the Daily Star was next, and just saying, look, does the age profile concern you? Your back four, they're all getting on a bit, more or less, he was saying, and can they last another 2 or 3 seasons? Again, he said it was a good question. He said, look, we need to review these things continually. He says, all teams evolve, and the key is they have to maintain consistency. He said, would it be easy to slip a new player into the back four? Is it down to the personnel, or is it down to the tactics that you have? Is it easy for people to slip straight into that squad? And Eddie paused a bit and then said, look, I can't predict that. He said, it is a difficult question. He says system and style is important, but it's not as important as the individuals. So a lot of emphasis on the individuals and the people that you bring in. But I think when you look at the back four, we've got there's still life in the old dogs yet. They're not that old as far as footballers are concerned. Lee Ryder, moving up the ranks, Lee. You got a question a bit earlier than normal. He said, can you learn more from a defeat, i.e. Sheffield Wednesday, than you can from a win, like the Leicester game? And he just said, yeah, look, the pain of defeat, it hurts, and it still hurts from Saturday. He said, you get time to assess it and see where it went wrong. He says it is painful, but you do learn to live with it. But yeah, you can sometimes learn more from a defeat. Also, Lee was trying to emphasise the fact that it was a gap now, as most teams have got the FA Cup game to play in between the 2 League Cup semi-finals. Newcastle have got a break, but, Eddie said, I don't really look at that as a benefit. He says, we would have preferred to be playing in the FA Cup. I've got to be honest. I mean, everyone knows my opinion on here. I was really disappointed with the team that he picked against Sheffield Wednesday. I think 8 changes was too much. I've got to be convinced that he meant that, and that's not just a little bit of clever, a clever bit of chat in a press conference. Because if you wanted to compete in the FA Cup, you wouldn't have made 8 changes. I'm not saying he chucked the game. I think he put faith in those players, but I just think he made the wrong decision. But that's last week's news. I've got to stop getting on about that. I really have. Sorry, folks. Lee also asked about Scott McTominay, the loan situation. It's been mentioned many, many times, and he went, there is no truth in that story. But he also said that the loan market is an option, but again, it's difficult and there's nothing imminent. Craig Hope was next up from the Daily Mail. Asking about Joe Linton and, again, in a roundabout way, asking if he was going to play. Look, he said, look, my relationship with Joe Linton is very good. I'll be sitting down with him again. And he says, my job is to pick a team to win. Craig then asked, does he want to play? And he went, undoubtedly, yes. Luke Edwards was next up, asking if Eddie was aware that Bruno had won the Sports Writers North East Player of the Year. He said he wasn't aware. He said it was a very good choice. Then he said, bizarrely, that he'd heard Luke on the radio and that he was very good. There was then a bit of banter backwards and forwards between the journalists, a lot of laughter. Eddie then emphasised that it wasn't by choice; he just flicked upon it. But after all the merriment over that situation, he went on to say that, look, Bruno's had an incredible impact on the team on and off the pitch. He says he's done lots of great things. He says, he's a passionate guy. He wants to win, and he can't speak highly enough of him. And again, he said, Luke pushing it on the Bruno thing, just said, look, I guess when you bring players in like that, you just hope they hit the ground. And he went, look, Bruno was keen to show people what he could do. We wanted to get on. He says, but we held him back. He says, and I'm delighted we did. He says, because once he hit the ground, he never looked back. And he's part of it. I think he says the best thing about him is as well that he doesn't see himself as an individual. He sees himself as part of a team. He doesn't feel bigger than the team. And he says, and that again is very important. Kieran was next up, asking if Joe Linton had addressed the players about the situation that's ongoing. He went, no. He says, that's a personal choice. He says, but he says, the players love Joe. He says, I might give him the opportunity to do that if he wants to do it, but it's a personal choice. And Kieran also was saying, do you think this could be a destabilising influence on the dressing room? And he went, as I sit here now, I don't think it will affect the group. He says, we understand the seriousness of it. He understands the seriousness of it. But he says, but the players all love Joe. Scott, I think from the Northern Echo is next, and just asking about youngsters really, and bringing in players for the academy, each window. And he said, look, it's a good question. We want to develop young players in the academy that we have here already. He says, but yes, there will be more deals done to bring in youngsters from elsewhere. He says, I don't have much time to look at those types of targets. He says, I don't have much time to look at the targets for players that we need now. He says, but, he says, as for the academy and the younger players, he says, that's very much a club thing, which involves scouts, etc., all under the remit, in charge of Dan Ashworth. So Dan Ashworth gets that job. Miles Starforth from the Shields Gazette asked about Target and John Joe, just asking how long their injuries were likely to take. Any update on that? And he just said, look, from the offset, it was 6 weeks for both players. That was the timeline, so nothing's changed. And again, he pushed again in a different way on the transfers. Are we looking at any particular positions? He said, look, we're looking at all positions. I know that doesn't answer your question. He says, and we are keeping, that kind of thing internal. Simon Bird was up next from the Daily Mirror, asking whether the training that Joe Linton might receive, or the education that Joe Linton might receive for the personal circumstances he's finding himself in off the pitch would be something that the team could all do. He said, yeah, could be possible training for all of us on that. Also asked him about selling players. Would he be doing any sales in this window or possibly this summer? And he went, look, I haven't got a huge desire at the moment to sell anyone in this window. He says, but you never know, something can always come in left field. He says, I don't think we're overloaded at this moment in time. Louise Taylor, she was last today. And wow, two questions which I've got to be honest, I just found naughty. For want of a better expression, Louise, very naughty. Have you spoken to the Saudis regarding Joe Linton? Was one of them with regards to the ongoing situation. And he, again, he batted it off. He just says, look, we've spoken to everyone, and now that everyone has had their say, it's in my hands as the manager. So it's as simple as that. Our final question was, is he the first player to be arrested that you have managed? He just paused. Somebody choked in the audience, which Eddie then said, get this man a drink. And he just said, I'm not sure. And that was the end of the press conference. Bizarre ending. I did feel, Google Louise Taylor, I guess, have a look on Twitter. It's been a bit naughty stuff with Louise over the years, I think, with Newcastle under the Ashley regime as well. And yeah, I just don't understand why some people ask these kind of questions in press conferences. But never mind, we move on. It's going to be an interesting night tonight. The three amigos, 5 o'clock. Join me, Mitch, George Mitchell, Keith Patterson, and Steve Hasty when he gets back from work. But looking forward to setting up the weekend for you. I hope you enjoyed that review, and we will catch you at 5 o'clock tonight. A big thank you to all our sponsors, as always. Thanks to Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, and our website skipsandbins.com. Easy, contract free, and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Thanks to Garden of Healing Dispensaries, CBD hemp and cannabinoid specialists. You can find them at thegohd.com. Thanks to Mr. Vicky's sauces, which are handmade in Cumbria, and you can find them at mrvickies.co.uk. If you want to make an order, give them a call on 01768 210 102 or email info@mrvickies.co.uk. Thanks to Blowhole Breweries, you can get a selection of beers, and the cans are in the design of the old Newcastle United entertainers strips. Blowholebrewery.co.uk. Thanks to Melly's Carpets and Beds, laying our reputation one recommendation at a time. The best quality around at the cheapest prices. Melly's Beds and Carpets.co.uk. Email sales@mellysbedsandcarpets.co.uk or give Melly a call on 01670 632 216. And thanks to United Group Travel Limited, UK Coach Holidays in Morpeth, 01670 362 460 or mobile 07957 141 654. Graham, your driver, Beverly answering your calls and looking after you on your tour. Some great deals coming up there. Get yourself onto the website to check them out. Thanks also to Media Arts, who do all of our videos and help us with the technological side of things. And thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, NUFCmatters.com. If you want to subscribe to the channel, then hit the subscribe button below. Hit the thumb up, which is the like button, which does us a big favour with the algorithm. And click share. Share it to Newcastle United Facebook groups or Twitter accounts or your own social media to help our community grow. And if you want to join the channel, hit the join button. And for as little as $1.99 a month, you can get some members-only videos and chances to win some fantastic prizes. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and the rest. Don't forget as well that we do events through NUFC Matters. And this one is the next event coming up, Friday the 24th of February, an evening with Newcastle United legend Steve Howe. Friday the 24th of February, Tyneside Irish Centre, and tickets are available at £50 from newcastlelegends.com. If you also go onto Voucher and search for the event, you can pick up a bargain on there. Don't forget, we also support the food bank on this channel. www.nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk is where you can find the Matchday Bucket. You can make a virtual donation to the Matchday Bucket 365 days of the year to keep helping the food bank in Newcastle.